I think the idea is that we are diverse in ourselves within our own thought processes and our own life experiences. And we're not going to think the same thing. I'm not going to think the same thing as another 45-year-old Latina woman working in politics. I might have a completely different perspective on what the right thing to do is, what the right legislation is, what the right policies are, who the good politicians are, who the good leaders are. We're all allowed to have those differences. And I think external factors and the system focuses on, well, they can't figure themselves out, they can't get along, so we should just ignore them. Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of together. I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Alvina Talks Shift. I have Bianka here. Honestly, she should have been one of my first, but she's been so busy. Bianca's known for being around town, always talking, chatting people up, networking. So she's finally made time for me on this podcast. And this is going to be super special because I think we're going to talk about something that we haven't touched on. And I don't know actually that a lot of people talk about it. We're going to talk about Black girl magic. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for
Hi, Bianca.
Hey.
We were chatting this morning about what you wanted to talk about, and you brought up something pretty mind-blowing. When we talk about American culture, African American Black culture is kind of a trope in the movies. It's kind of a character that we play, that is played, that's portrayed. Um, it's been called Black girl magic, the Black girl friend who comes in and, has all the great advice and all the life experience to help their white counterpart in the movie or the show get through their struggles. But the angle that you want to talk about it is super interesting. It's about when Black women are set up for power, but then they're also set up to fail. So talk about what Black girl magic is to you.
Well, I think overall, as it relates to the term, in the sense of the term, is just the beauty and the aura of who we are as Black women. We are trendsetters. People want to have our hair, they want our nose, they want our butts, they want our hips. We're very expressive as it relates to how we wear our clothes, how we show up in places. That's the beauty of the Black girl magic and the fact that we influence the world over in every single aspect of society. You'll see a little bit of influence by Black women, hence the Black girl magic. And so when we look at that as it relates to what we have seen from the political lens and the trends that where you see some conservative movements where they're attacking that Black girl magic. If we look at the recent issue, that's why we were talking about this morning. I was thinking about Dr. Claudine Gay, who was basically forced to resign from Harvard University because of her Black girl magic. It makes me wonder. It just makes me um, kind of take a step back as it relates to all of the work that we try to do as Black women in this country. And then when you see people moving up and doing what they need to do in society and is being attacked, it's disheartening.
So your take is Black girl magic is used to like women are using it to elevate themselves to succeed. It's that like you said, that expressiveness, those life experiences that push them to go to the top. And then once they're set up to just fail. Where's the resiliency and sustainability of that?
I don't know. And it's really hard because I even think of our Vice President Kamala Harris. There's all it's this attack that she's not good enough, or she's. I remember when she announced that she was running. There was all this attack on her, on the record that she had as a very very successful attorney, even in the work that she did in the legal area in the state of Colorado, which is I mean, state of California, which was completely impressive. But everybody was trying to find some way to attack her. Even now, they're saying she could never be a president. And I'm like, okay, if this was a white woman, would we be having this conversation? You have this woman of color who
Yeah.
clearly has done everything she needs to do to get to where she needs to go. She got the education, she has the professional experience. What more do you want from her? But because of the color of her skin and the fact that she's a woman of color, she's somehow not good enough. And I think that's what we're experiencing just on, on display here in our society. We would look at Dr. Claudine Gay. It was the first Black woman president of Harvard University. Somehow there's something wrong with her. What can we find? So you have like these individuals. I can't remember the name of the guy who was like trying to find something wrong with her. So now all of a sudden her work isn't um, validated because she's plagiarized all of her professional academia literature. Somehow something
Right.
wrong with. So it was like this witch hunt to find something wrong, and they did. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering. It just makes you wonder once you get there, the anxiety and the trauma you probably experience in those spaces.
So, what can young Black women, young women of color, and those that are kind of raising themselves to the ranks, what should they do to, first of all, know that this system is built this way? What can they do to change it if it's possible? And once they're there and they start seeing the symptoms of this system attacking them, where do they go for help?
Well, number one, I think this country is a contradiction, right? Everybody tells you to go to college, do what you need to do, go up the ranks. Then you get there, there's a system that doesn't want you there. You think about the other lady, I think it was Lincoln University, she committed suicide. She was the vice president of student affairs, I believe, and her name was um, Bailey. I think it was Antoinette Bailey. She committed suicide, and they say it suggested that it was at the hands of the white male president who they say bullied her and she committed suicide. And so we look at statistics and we see a significant number of Black women leaving corporate America because corporate America is not a place that is welcoming what we call our Black girl magic. And I don't know what to tell the next generation. I don't know. I think mental health is extremely important, but also so is entrepreneurship. Black women are one of the leading groups as it relates to creating their own businesses, creating entrepreneurship, because of the simple fact that corporate America doesn't want us there. They're. I think if I could be very candid, I think it's a certain level of intimidation. They don't they don't want to see us outshine them. They don't want to see us show our level of improvement that we have. Because what's at the end of the day, and you know this as a woman of color, representation is so important because you have to have different values and perspectives and views on things. We as women, there's this whole political movement to increase the number of political representation as it relates to legislators. I think Colorado, Nevada, I can't remember the other state. We're like one of the leading states as it relates to women representation in state legislation, and that's extremely important.
What's interesting though is what people harp on when there's like people of color, like there's the Latino caucus and the Black caucus and the women's caucus. And people are so focused on, well, they're not getting along, they're fighting over this or they're fighting over this. But I think the point isn't that they're fighting over certain issues or strategies. I think the idea is that we are diverse in ourselves within our own thought processes and our own life experiences. And we're not going to think the same thing. I'm not going to think the same thing as another 45-year-old Latina woman working in politics. I might have a completely different perspective on what the right thing to do is, what the right legislation is, what the right policies are, who the good politicians are, who the good leaders are. We're all allowed to have those differences, and I think external factors and the system focuses on, well, they can't figure themselves out, they can't get along, so we should just ignore them.
Yeah. I think because of who we are and what we represent in this country, there's just the powers that be that are scared of what's changing and what the country really is starting to look like. So it's, what can we do to hurt this movement? What can we do to hurt that movement? What can we do to not allow Latina or different women of color, people of color, excel in this country? And it's sad, and then unfortunately we see that creeping up in the current political climate, which means that those of us who, like I say, have common sense, need to really show up in November.
There's a certain like barrier to success, right? Depending on access to education, access to what young people like, access to having a house, having a car, the right economic outcomes to succeed. Um, what do you think are some solutions? Like, because at every one of those levels, women, and more specifically, women of color, are facing challenges in our society, right?
Mhm.
So, where is the resiliency? Like, what do you recommend people do to heal, overcome, and move on so that they can continue to succeed?
Well,
Like, what have you done? What pushes you through when you get hurt or hit by the system? What do you do?
you know, I will say that I am proud to be an educated woman, and I'm proud to have been to a really fantastic historically black college and university. Shout out to my professor, Dr. Eva Bayham, who taught every single undergraduate class on a graduate level. And she really made sure that she highlighted that we were academians, and she highlighted being able to engage in intellectual discourse. She would always say that, and she would always say, "Never make a statement where you paint yourself in a corner." So I never speak in absolutes, but nonetheless, I think that was a foundation for me to be able to think, to be able to understand facts, to be able to analyze information. Number one, and then I would say number two, my mother was my parents, both my parents, God rest their souls. Um, I both of my parents really instilled in us the ability to believe in yourself, and even being raised in a Christian home. My parents are pastors. Just having that faith system or go to help you get through what is maybe difficult in life. And I think foundationally, that's how I get through it. And my mother would always say something. She was just so wise in all her ways. She would say,
Oh wait,
accentuate
now Bianca's gonna throw us some black girl magic.
the ready, about to give it to you, catch it. She would always say, accentuate the positive. And I just how I live my life. I mean, I and even now, of course, in my 40s, and you've taught me this. I will say some stuff you can't sweat the small stuff. Some things you just gotta it is what it is. Just keep going. And I will say I just came back from Senegal last month. Absolutely amazing trip. And I visited Goree Island, and I visited the slave castles, the slave houses. And I was going through the slave house, and there's this window, and it's called the door of no return. And you go, it is extremely emotional, especially as an African American, because we don't have like that direct connection to who we are as an ethnic minority in this country. So nonetheless, I'm sitting there and I'm on the bank of the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm looking into the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm listening to the tour guide tell us, the numbers that they tell us, as it relates to the slaves who didn't make the trip, who drowned in the Atlantic, is probably triple. what we've been taught in history books. So I'm looking over and I'm looking in the ocean and I'm crying like, oh my gosh, these poor souls are lost. And I'm just like, just devastated about what we've been through as African Americans in this country. And a Senegal, the host, who was actually Senegalese, comes and he stands next to me and he goes, even though this journey for us as Black people, and you look at the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery, even though that was devastating, he said, look at what we've been able to still accomplish in the face of tragedy and travesty. I was like, whoa. It was just a come to Jesus moment. It was just like, wow. Even in the face of all the things that we've been through, we still been able to succeed as Black people in this country. We've seen the first Black president of the United States. We've seen the first Black and Native Indian woman become a vice president of the United States. We've seen like super pop stars. We've seen a Black woman go on the moon. You know, we've still been able to succeed even when there's a system that says we don't want you to.
I'm so glad you brought up your trip to Senegal. And I know you've traveled to a lot of African countries. And I don't know, maybe internally, the Black community talks about this a lot, but externally, what is the dynamics between the like people that live in different countries in Africa and the African American experience? And how do you connect? And what are the differences?
You know, I just want to give a shout out to the African Leadership Group who here in Denver and Colorado, Papa Dia or Papa Ja, which is the correct pronunciation because it's French. He has really been doing a really good job in trying to bridge that gap because we're really divided. We don't know the journey and the experience of each other. We really don't. I remember the first time I went to Africa, which is I think 2021. I went to Kinshasa, Congo, and I met chiefs who were like eager to meet me, and I was like, oh wow, you know, I felt really important, right? So they came like from their really far away neighboring villages just to come meet these African Americans that were in the country. And it was a really, really big deal because one thing that they said to us was that the European transatlantic slave trade, which was led by the Europeans, basically took the best and the brightest from the country, and that we were welcomed home. This is home. This is for you. And I just started crying because, again, as African Americans, we don't have that direct connection to our ancestry. And he said, your DNA is buried in the ground. The umbilical cord is buried in the ground. He says, so you're always connected to the continent. And he had said something that was really important. He said, the salvation to the continent is in your hands because again, they took the best and the brightest. So fast forward 3 years later, I go to Senegal, and I never saw the slave houses. And the tour guide basically gives us this description of why or what the best and the brightest was. So you had to be a certain weight, couldn't have any deformities. Um, certain like when certain women went to certain countries, they had to have certain shapes of their breast and their behinds, which is actually
Wow, so it's very specific.
it's very savage if you think about it. I mean, it's almost a bit sickening when you
Yeah.
think about it. So nonetheless, so going there and understanding it from being on the continent and being in the countries and then coming back, I see how there was a system to divide us. So even
Yeah,
talking
right?
to indigenous Africans are in Africa, they don't know the atrocity of the slave trade. They don't know the atrocity of the transatlantic slave trade, the journey, Jim Crow, the whole nine. And then we talk to African Americans. They don't understand the impact that neo-colonialism has had on current state of African countries. So there's you still see the influence of the French. You still see the influence of the Belgium, like in the Congo, and it is really interesting, and I think it's going to take a lot of work. Like I met a man here in Colorado. He was Cameroonian, and he said that every African that comes to the United States should take an African American history class. He said because we have no clue, no idea.
That's so interesting because I know for you and me, it's centered in our work, but even the American history that they're teaching isn't even accurate. So,
It's not. And I was a history major. And when I went to Senegal, my tour guide tore all that up. He tore it all up. And I said, can you come to the United States and really teach history? Because we need it. It was amazing. It was so, I mean, it was so eye opening. It was spiritual. It was emotional. But I think every African American should at least get a chance to travel to Africa so that we can see our homeland and to see our actual people. And what was really cool, though, I have to mention this: when we were on Goree Island, we got a chance to meet the mayor of the island. Very very small island, and one of the dignitaries, we got to meet the entire legislative cabinet. One of the dignitaries is a woman, and she looks at me and she goes, "You are my daughter." I was like,
oh my god. Oh my
she
god.
goes, "You're my
I'm
daughter."
crying.
And again, that is like it's full circle for African Americans when you
Yeah.
experience something like that.
But I know that you're working on a project that's really important to Black students and African American, those who have, multiracial, biracial children that have African roots in our education system. What are you working on?
So yeah, so there's another bill that is being that was actually introduced already this year in our legislative session, and it's Justice for Black Coloradans. And basically, it is a commission that will work on a racial equity and justice study to really look at the atrocities that have happened across the state of Colorado as it relates to African Americans. So we look at the disparities we have that we have been impacted by as it relates to housing, criminal justice, health disparities, as we talked about with maternal mortality, education, and economic mobility. You look at issues historically as it relates to redlining, places where we can live. I remember my aunt used to talk about how when she first moved to Colorado, she couldn't live past a certain part in York, primarily because she was Black. So, there's deeds, there's covenants in neighborhoods where it was in the deed, in the covenant, you cannot sell this house to a Black person. If you do sell it, you have to sell it back to the bank. And so when you look at those historic atrocities and its impact on upward mobility and equity and equality for Black people, that is something that I think is very very important, that we need to study, and the world needs to see it. The Colorado needs to see it.
So, where can people find more information about that so that they can join your movement?
I believe it is justiceforblackcoloradans.com. You can go there, and you can follow us on Facebook, Justice for Black Coloradans. We are on X/Twitter, Justice Black Co, and also Instagram, Justice for Black Co.
That's amazing. Okay, I want to switch a little bit over to the maternal health of Black women in Colorado. I know that you're working on this issue. Um, why is this important to you? Why is it important to society? And what do we need to do to get ourselves in a good place here?
Well, that maternal mortality impacts Black women disproportionately because we die, I think, 3 times more. The rate is 3 times more during maternal mortality as it relates or compared to white women similarly situated. And this is the kicker: it has absolutely nothing to do with education or economics. I was just reading an article the other day about Serena Williams, how she personally experienced this. Now it's Serena Williams, okay, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and she basically had told her nurse that she felt shortness of breath, and the nurse told her, "Oh, the pills or the medicine that you have you delusional." So she doesn't know anything about her own body, right?
Wow.
So body autonomy is okay for white women and other people, but it's not okay for me as a black woman or other women of color, right? And just sure enough, she had blood clots because she had experienced them, earlier. And I think about Judge Hatchett's daughter who died also after giving a cesarean. So a cesarean usually takes, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 45 minutes to an hour. That doctor did her cesarean in 20 minutes. And after he did her cesarean in 20 minutes, he left and went golfing. She was in the hospital and she said, I don't feel good. Something's going on. And she was bleeding. She was losing blood. And the nurse said, literally told her, you're not our priority. That woman died in 1 hour later.
Oh my gosh.
It's really not about economics or education. It's really about um, doctors and medical systems really allowing black women to have autonomy in their own body and say, hey, I know what's going on. This is not how I'm feeling, and believing, and this is how I'm feeling and believing those women when it comes to that. So I'm really um, happy about what we're doing here in Colorado with reproductive justice and making sure that reproductive health, even abortion care, and reproductive justice and rights, whatever you want to call it. But I will say, as a black woman, I think it's important to call it reproductive justice because reproductive justice is a term that was created by black women, which is an answer to a holistic approach to reproductive health. So it basically brings in the idea and the notions of the right to have a baby, the right to not have a baby, and the right to raise children in an environment that is conducive to that child being successful in life. So you'll usually hear me say reproductive justice over reproductive rights.
So what are you working on right now to help that system or hold doctors accountable?
Well, there's a couple of bills that are being presented here, but there is an initiative that the Reproductive Coalition has that I'm helping to support. Um, and I'm really hoping that we pass that bill in November. This November, I believe it's Initiative 89 that I'm working on, and I really want to work to support because I've just been watching these travesties and these tragic situations where women who need abortion care just to save their lives, who are getting them in all these different countries. We just see red state after red state after red state that is outlawing it. And I remember seeing a story not too long ago where a woman had to lose her entire reproductive organs because she wasn't able to get a needed or suggested abortion because of her OBGYN basically told her you can't deliver this child. But because they couldn't abort the child by law, she had to lose her whole entire reproductive organs, which I think is absolutely crazy. And it was her and her husband. This is the married family. It's not some
Wow.
young woman off the street that was like, "No, I don't want this child." She was like, "No, I've been going through prenatal care. This is what is happening. And so, in order to save my life and my reproductive organs, the doctor said it. And by law, she could not do it. And so now she can't have children."
Well, Bianca, you have had an amazing impact on my life, on so many young people that I know you're constantly seeking out to give them the support they need. All your amazing work within the faith community. You're so well respected, and I just appreciate so much that you're able to spend time with me today, and your friendship. I adore you. I think you're amazing. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Thank you. And likewise, you've been um, such a great teacher for me in so many ways and supporter. And you actually see me through quite a bit in my life, personally, professionally. And I just want to say I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalksshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.